Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we're going to talk about the state of the media. Now, as you know, that there are two institutions that can protect freedoms in our country. One is the judiciary, and the other is the media. Now, why do I say two institutions that can protect freedom? Without the media, even the judiciary cannot protect freedoms in our country for the simple reason governments will do what they do. Governments always do what they do, no matter which government is in power. Laws will be passed without reference to violation to fundamental rights, and they will be tested in court. But they will never be able to test them in court unless there is information in the public domain. And who brings that information in the public domain? It's the media. It's investigative journalism. And we're going to talk about the state of the media today with two individuals whose names are associated with the concept of stating truth to power, who have always challenged what governments say and what governments do, who have been fearless in their career as journalists in the country. On the right side, I have N. Ram. He needs no introduction, but he joined journalism in 1966, a long time ago. He has been awarded the Padma Bhushan in 1990. He was the chief editor of the Hindu group of papers. From 2003 to 2012, he's been awarded for his excellence in journalism, especially the Beaufort story, by the Columbia University. He has received several awards, and he is a voice that is heard and recognized in India. Karan Thappar, again, he needs no introduction. He has embarrassed many, a victim, when he has interviewed them. His shows are watched eagerly every week. He's worked with India Today. He has worked with TV Network 18. And as a student, he studied at Cambridge. He was the president of the Cambridge Union. He got a doctorate from Oxford. He worked in television for 10 or 11 years in the UK before he came to India, I think in 1990. And ever since he came to India, he is a voice to be heard. And I remember the two interviews that really changed the nature of journalism in this country. One was with Kapil, if I remember correctly, and the other with Musharraf. And the two other victims of his...
I'm very glad you haven't mentioned Modi.
I was going to. I said the two others who have been victims of his interviews is one is
Jayalalitha.
One is Jayalalitha, and the other is Mr. Modi. And somehow the interviews could not be completed. And we know why they couldn't be completed. Well, thank you very much for being here. So as I said, what do you think is the state of the media, Ram?
May I use first names?
Please.
So Kapil, there was a time when I thought that India was in an enviable position when it came to freedom and independence of the press. In those days, mainly the printed press, because broadcast was with the government. At least in comparison, enviable, at least in comparison with other developing countries.
Right.
But that was 45 years ago. And today, if I said that, I'd be accused of purveying disinformation, fake news, for various complex reasons. And I look forward to discussing them. To start with, I think very large sections of the so-called mainstream media, broadcasting overwhelmingly, at least in the English language and languages I know, but not entirely. And the print press, which is also on digital platforms substantially, they've lost their independence. They've lost their elan.
Why do you think that's happened? I mean, Karan, why do you think that's happened?
I think it's happened for 3 or 4 reasons. One is that they have been compromised, and secondly, they've been intimidated. There are numerous ways, and if you want, I'll go into some of those details for you, where the government can put pressure subtly, but also obviously and clearly, and as a result of which editors, proprietors, individual journalists have all been cowed down. I'll give you a couple of examples. The government is the biggest advertiser in the Indian media. If the government stops giving you ads, most media companies suffer. That threat is always held up. Number two, ministers or other officials in the government pick up the phone and either say directly to the editor or to the proprietor, why do you want to have X writing for you? Why do you want stories on subject Y? Why do you want columnists like Z? Immediately they stop. Many media houses run conclaves. It's important for them that the top government minister should come. The threat is if you have X, Y, or Z appearing on your television channel, we will not appear. On TV, they do other things. They stop your sponsorship, they stop your advertising. They actually lean specifically on your advertisers. It's happened to me personally, where our advertisers have been told by the government it's unfriendly to continue and cover the show. They back off because they have relationships to maintain. Or they start boycotting your program. If you're a television anchor who does a discussion program and the BJP has been told not to send their ministers or their spokesman, it becomes virtually impossible to continue. Channels then turn around and say, listen, much as I like you, we've got a problem retaining you because the BJP or the ministers will not come on your show. There's a multitude of ways in which therefore...
But you are talking about direct interference, but Ram, you're talking about the structural issue.
Yes. One is, I think, the weakening of the economic base. It's happened in the era of digitization. I think nobody has really solved the issue of the business model. The business model for much of the 20th century, certainly in the second half, was advertising subsidized news. And advertisers sometimes intervene, but there was some protection because they believed that they needed this. And there's a certain autonomy, although even then there used to be pressure from some. One thing I can pick up from what Karan said, at that time, there was no overwhelming reliance on government ads. I remember for the Hindu, for example, it was about 10% in the late 80s and right 90s. And the whole thing changed later on because of the weakening of the economic base. Secondly, I think we already, if we are a colossus, it's a colossus of clay feet, because already during the emergency, those who were of an authoritarian bent of mind had learnt that they won't stand up. I hear all kinds of stories about this organization stood up, so-and-so stood up, and so on. But overall, I was part of it. I'm old enough to remember, and we were part of the resistance in our own ways. And Tamil Nadu was some kind of haven in those days. I think there was no worthwhile resistance at that time when such total censorship was imposed. And over time, and the other thing, Kapil, is the social media. The present government, the Hindutva authoritarian regime and the Prime Minister don't need the media as a primary resource because they can communicate directly. And they have all these bucks, these who attack you. If you, on all that. All this has weakened it's structural. It's weakened the nerve of media houses, and independence is now a scarce commodity. However, there's a bright spot. We still have...
I doubt it. I don't see any bright spots actually.
No. Can I make one small point before we change the subject? Structurally, Ram is right, that the media in India has not discovered a formula whereby it makes money and therefore is economically independent and not dependent upon the government. However, the media all over the world is not a money-making entity.
Yes.
Nowhere in the developed free world is the media actually profitable. If it is, it's only marginally so. But that hasn't hindered the New York Times, the Washington Post, the London Times, the Financial Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the BBC from being critical. I mean, the BBC is an excellent example of how a country can create a culture.
It's funded by individuals, no? BBC?
BBC is funded by a charter.
That's right.
Right? However, BBC people are appointed by the government.
That's right.
Right? From the Director General to the Chairman to the others. And they are quite happy. They are free to rebel against the government. The present chairman of the BBC is an Indian, Samir Shah. He's just been appointed in March. He's taken over. In no way would Samir, who spent a lifetime working in independent media, kowtow to the government because it's not expected of him. The society and the country upholds his right to be independent, liberal, critical, and if need be, even exposing the government and abusive of them at times, but politely so. In India, in addition to the structural problems that Ram mentioned, there is also a growing, emerging social culture whereby deference is expected rather than criticism. And quite often, when you are critical of the government, social media doesn't support you. Social media descends upon you as if you've done something wicked and wrong and reprehensible. That level of support from society is also sometimes critically missing. Not always, but sometimes missing in India.
I have two separate statements to make on this. Number one, the dependence of the media on advertisement. I'll just give you some figures for 22-23. Dainik Jagran 9 crore 71 lakhs. Times of India 9 crore 43 lakhs. Hindustan Times 5 crore 76 lakhs. Amar Ujala 5. So it goes on and on. That's the kind of dependence on advertisements. But the structural issue, I think, is far deeper in India. And I tell you, this is my own view. The corporate world owns the largest assets in this country. The corporate world also owns the media. The corporate world also funds the party through electoral bonds and other means and cash, right? And therefore, it's the corporate world that is actually controlling the narrative of this country. And therefore, and that suits the politician and that suits the party because they can direct the mainstream media to do what they want and they can give the favors to the corporate world and the corporate will do their bidding. I think that's a far more serious structural issue.
Absolutely, because the corporate world has many more irons in the fire than just the media. The media, as far as corporations are concerned, is just one aspect, the not profit-making aspect, and therefore the small and insignificant aspect of their operation. It may attract attention to the companies that own them, but it doesn't deliver the money.
That's right.
Because the money comes from other entities that they run, they are vulnerable to the government turning around and saying, if you don't control your papers or your editor or your journalist or your television channel, we will threaten action where your money is being made, which is why they're vulnerable. Which is why also abroad, although corporates often own the media, whether it's the Washington Post owned by Bezos, whether it's the London Times owned by Murdoch, right? Nonetheless, structures have been set up to create a measure of independence. The Guardian is a trust, Le Monde is a trust. When Murdoch first bought the Times, he actually created a separate entity with independent directors. He undermined it himself thereafter, but for the first year and a half, it was actually run as a separate entity with a measure of guaranteed independence. That doesn't
You can take the Wall Street Journal, for example.
Yeah.
But you see, here there is also a difference. There are families that control these corporations.
Yes.
And that families have deep interest both in politics as well as in business.
And those families...
In addition, sorry.
I was just going to say, forgive me, I hesitate to say it because here is a family
That's all
that
right.
controls
That's all
it.
right. That's
But
fine.
many-
It's perhaps the only newspaper.
Many Indian families, and I think the Hindu family is the great exception, do not necessarily personally respect the right of the media to be independent.
Yes.
Instead, they are the first to bring
This is the
pressure
point.
on their editors,
Yes.
pressure on their journalists, because they themselves are apprehensive,
Correct.
A, of the reverberations or repercussions, but B, they want to maintain personal relationships with the power that be.
So in the light of what you said, that the politician rings up, I find that some of these family people who control the media ring up the journalists, why you're doing this.
Yes.
That's the
Absolutely.
other part of it.
It happens everywhere, I can tell you. Nobody is exempt from facing this pressure. It's how you respond to it. I got a call from somebody working in radio asking me peremptorily to, I think he got the wrong address or he didn't know, saying that write on the government's all they're doing for agriculture. And then I said, I'm sure the editor will do it. I'm not the editor now. I'll pass on your message if you like. They'll take their own stand. Then he asked me, when will it appear? Then that got me. And I said, who are you to prescribe this, etc.? Then he backed off. So this is a small example. I don't want to name him, this person, because I know he may be a small fry in that setup under instructions. But they get calls from the PMO. A couple of people regularly ring up editors or the bosses and apply pressure. And that's enough these days. But one other thing, Kapil, in what you said about owning assets and the overwhelming power, is the nexus between big business and the government. And this government, no government before this got anything like this kind of near unanimous support.
655 crores.
Let me tell you, there's something else that happens in India that would be considered abominable, and I'm using that adjective deliberately abroad. Ministers, as ministers, can ring up and shout on the phone because they don't like a program that you've done,
Yes.
because they don't like an article that you've written. Right. You would never find a British cabinet minister, even if he's being personally criticized, ringing up and shouting at a journalist who's done the job. Boris Johnson, a former prime minister, has a 4-part series that is just ending on Channel 4, which has excoriated him. It's called him a charlatan, it's called him a liar, it's called him a fraud. And he's a former prime minister. He may well become prime minister again, some people speculate and say, but nowhere in Britain would any conservative politician have rung up publicly Channel 4 and complained, what have you done? Yet in India, I can give you a personal example of sitting ministers who, when I interviewed Pratap Bhanu Mehta, didn't like what Pratap Bhanu Mehta had said about the government and Mr. Modi, and rang me up during the intermission in the middle of the program that night when it was broadcast to scream and shout. And I said to them, hang on a second, wait till you see part 2 after the break. It's all about Rahul Gandhi.
Oh, I see.
But they couldn't even wait to see the full program because they couldn't contain their anger. That attitude from the government is typical of the way intimidation applies in India. An individual journalist, particularly because journalists are not rich people, they are economically dependent upon the job that they do, can become vulnerable. The fear of losing your job because you've annoyed the government or your boss or your editor is huge.
I'm involved in the media big time because, I do a lot of press conferences. These reporters come and say, sir, we agree with you. But the question is, we'll do this story
and lose our job.
Lose our job. So the reporter on the ground is independent, I still believe.
Yes.
But it's the management that doesn't allow the news to come through.
And and I'm sure Ram will agree.
When will you allow me to bring in the bright spots?
Okay, let's
But before you bring in the bright spots, just let's make this one point. In any country where the media operates independently and successfully and is critical of the government, the support of management for the free press is essential.
That's
At
right.
the end of the day, it's not the journalist who has to fight back against the government. It's the management.
Yes.
It is the chairman, it is the CEO, it is the editor.
Right.
They are the ones who take the flak. That is their prime job. In India, management is very reluctant, A, to defend journalists who are critical, B, they are probably the first to put pressure on that journalist not to be critical,
exactly.
and C, they often succumb themselves to pressure from the government, take this columnist off, stop that person.
Some people have lost jobs on that count, yes.
Absolutely.
Ram, you were saying about the bright spots.
Yes, I think this diversity, about 100,000 newspapers, some of them are fictitious. TV stations, is it 350 or something like that?
Over 400.
Over 400 news channels. You don't know what's out.
Thousands of newspapers.
Yes, more than 100,000. More than 100,000,
Exactly.
at least on paper.
Yeah.
And now, we don't know quite what they are up to, and nobody can control the whole thing. This diversity exists, and there are spaces. Now, you're here, for example, you've got a tremendous reach in this medium. And Karan, I really admired a lot of your work for many years, first on television and now on your YouTube channel.
Thank you.
And so on. And these voices are becoming very important because they speak to issues. So The Wire or Scroll.
Yeah, but now they're going to control that, Ram. You said you have the new law coming in 2023. I mean,
but let's see how much they can control. Because I think
if they try and control OTT platforms, YouTube,
it'll restrict.
Content, that's most dangerous. I mean,
then we have to come to you.
Is the fact-checking mechanism that they're putting in place, where the government's own entity will determine whether what you said is right or wrong.
Yes.
And remember, right or wrong is often an interpretation. It's not necessarily a black and white established fact.
Okay.
And on grounds of interpretation, they'll be striking you down all the time.
The second factor, bright spot, is what you said, reporters on the ground. I'm connected with the Asian College of Journalism. I'm one of the trustees, one of the founding trustees. Sashi Kumar is our chairman. And I think we see a large number of journalists come. About 60% of them are young women who come in. And they come with idealism. Of course, we tell them that in the newsroom, you may not be able to, you may not be allowed to practice these values, but you must do your best. And I see a lot of, it's not the best paying job in the market. And yet they come year after year and they do investigative work. They believe in independence. They believe in contributing to society, responsibility and all that. And there are people, and I see the press clubs
Yes.
the unions, even the Editors Guild.
Yes.
Last 2 years, they've done a splendid
Fabulous
job,
yes.
including the
Speaking out,
current,
including now the president.
including right now. Anant is the
Yes,
president.
Yes.
And so on. So these are assets for us. And thirdly, the element of surprise. Media organizations, you don't expect them to do these stories. Take the question of electoral bonds.
Yeah.
I think many sections of the Indian news media have done us proud on this.
Yeah,
kind of
fabulous work.
I start with the Hindu, but before that, News Laundry and News Minute are working together. The Hindu, Deccan Herald.
And superb coverage by the Express.
And the Express, Indian Express. This is they're competing.
But these are the shining stars.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing about electoral bonds. I completely agree that the coverage when the story was broken by the Supreme Court was brilliant.
Yeah.
And the extent to which papers like the Hindu and the Express did different stories, bringing out different aspects, was truly commendable. However, what you don't have any longer is the number of scoops that we did when you were a reporter. You exposed Bofors, and you exposed Bofors not because someone else had broken it, but because you found the story, dug deeper, and kept digging till you got to the facts and you embarrassed the government. Those exposés, those scoops that actually draw the government hauled across the court have become few and far between. Why? Because proprietors won't fund them. They're scared of the outcome of them. Journalists are intimidated because they're worried about the loss of their own jobs. And as a result of which, editors keep away from them. And that environment that nurtured them, generally in society, no longer expects them and no longer looks for them.
There's another aspect to it, and namely, now what's happening is that even if you have that scoop, even if you do the scoop, the question is that the mainstream media is talking about what Sita Raman said.
Yes.
What the Home Minister said.
Yes.
They are trying to project that. That means they are on the other side saying, try and explain what their position is and try and tell what is your position, where their position, instead of doing a scoop.
Kapil, you put your finger on, I think, what is perhaps the biggest fault in our television channels. We do interviews, for instance, with the Prime Minister, not questioning him on his policies, not holding him in the dock because his government has failed to deliver. Instead, we put questions to him about how he thinks about the opposition leaders, giving him a platform to criticize his opponents rather than question him. Right? We give him a platform to criticize people he doesn't like. And the same is true when we interview other ministers. We actually have questions like, give me your take on this. What sort of question is that?
Exactly.
You have a question which should be pointed and actually putting a particular point of view so that you pinion the person and force him or her to reply. Instead, you have a question which says, X has happened. What's your take on it?
Exactly.
There's no pressure in that question.
Therefore, you'll never get a scoop. You'll never get a scoop with this kind of journalism.
You won't even get an interview.
Yes.
But the digital news providers, the small ones, we must really support them in a bigger way. The Wire, News Laundry, News Minute.
Newsclick, what's happened?
With Newsclick.
He's inside. I'm trying to get him out from jail.
He's been there for nearly 6 or 8 months.
They are fighting about they're boxing about their weight. They're doing some of them are doing splendid work. They don't have enough resources, and we must have a movement which supports them. Let's form a trust where people contribute.
We need to do that. Actually, you need to set up a whole trust. Allow people to contribute in this country, and then don't take any advertisements. And on these platforms, social media platforms, bring news to people. That's the way forward. Actually, some journalists came to me and said, we want to do that. And not some, senior journalists.
You know what will be the greatest contribution to the media and to Indian democracy beyond the media? If someone with the wealth of an Ambani or an Adani, and the second you take those names that I'm about to say becomes unimaginable. But if they were to set up a newspaper or a channel, allow it the independence it requires, they've got the money for it not to matter to them what it costs, let's be honest. But if they have the guts and the commitment to give that channel or the newspaper the independence to operate freely, to operate under an editor that they've chosen, but they respect and give freedom to, you would have a terrific change overnight.
Utopian world is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. But you could actually make politicians Learn to respect an independent media, because that credible media will also, when it praises them, bring them real, true laurels. At the moment, when the media praises the Prime Minister or the Home Minister, it's not taken seriously because it's seen and known as sycophancy.
I mean, I was asked a question just the other day that Sitharaman says that what's the connection between an ED raid and the person contributing through the bond?
Yes.
I mean, for a journalist to ask that question, I mean, I was shocked at that question itself. I mean,
the truthful answer is 3 days.
Yes, exactly.
3 days between the raid and the buying of the bond.
no, even if it's months, remember, Karan, the problem is that elections only happen at a certain time.
Absolutely.
So if you are raided in January and the election is in October, you'll buy the bond in October because there's a 15-day window period. So even if there's a gap of 4, 5 months or 6 months, it's because the election hasn't taken place. But the quid pro quo is clear.
And you can extend that particular I'm unable to pronounce the word sadly. Analogy.
Yeah.
You can extend that particular analogy to look at other aspects of electoral bonds, which again, only a few papers have brought up. The number of companies that have actually bought bonds either just before or just after they were awarded government contracts for government projects. Those are clear quid pro quos and nepotism. And then the number of companies that came into being that were incorporated weeks or at most a year before they bought bonds with a paid up share capital of barely a few lakhs, and they're buying bonds worth crores.
Absolutely.
Right? These are shell
Some companies running at losses
Yes.
and contributing. So what does this tell you about journalism in our country? Great stories,
Yes.
but how to take it forward?
Yes.
That's the big thing, and and the courts, of course, have taken cognizance of it. But courts can't do more than this. Ultimately, now it's the investigating agency has to take it forward, but they will never do it.
But the courts are also, forgive me, very slow and often unwilling to step in and defend journalists who are wrongly pilloried by the government. Look at the number of journalists. Take the example of Siddiq Kapil.
Yeah, I was his lawyer.
21 or 22 months he was held
for no
in
reason
jail
at all.
without bail under UAPA.
That's right.
And presumably, I think sedition as well, but I can't swear to sedition. All because he was going to cover a rape and he didn't even get there to cover it.
Absolutely.
And the courts were reluctant to give him bail.
No, look at News Clip.
There you are.
I know. He was, probably you don't know, he was charged because he was running, this was not print media.
Yes.
Right. So
purely digital.
Therefore, because of digital media, the Reserve Bank of India regulation didn't apply. And they foisted a case of the CBI by applying that, and the Reserve Bank of India said it doesn't apply, the regulation doesn't apply. And he was sent to jail for that.
And here I must name the New York Times as a major culprit, because that story on Neville Roy Singham, whom I know personally, he founded a world-class IT consultancy called ThoughtWorks. He sold it, and a large portion of what he got, he was the predominant owner, he put in a trust. And using US law.
Chinese connection.
That's right.
There's no Chinese connection.
I
He's in
know
China.
that, but this is the allegation.
But do you remember
you know the story. Yeah.
Do you remember your introduction to this program a moment ago? There are two great institutions that stand up for freedom of the press, the judiciary and the media.
Yes.
But when the media is in trouble and when journalists are in trouble, the judiciary does not stand up for the freedom of the press.
You're right.
Siddiq Kapil is a crying example of where our judiciary should be, forgive my language, ashamed of itself.
Journalists imprisoned in India as of 2023. Asif Sultan, Kashmiri journalist, reporter and assistant editor in Kashmir narrator. Gautam Navlaka under house arrest. Sajad Gul, trainee reporter with the digital news organization, the Kashmir Wala, imprisoned since January 2022. Rupesh Kumar Singh, freelance journalist, imprisoned since July 2022. Most of them under UAPA.
Yes.
We're getting bail is close to impossible.
Prabir Purkayastha, founder and editor-in-chief of NewsClick, imprisoned under UAPA and IPC sections on charges including raising funds for terrorist activities and criminal conspiracy. Irfan Mehraj, Kashmiri freelance journalist, imprisoned since March 2023 under UAPA, and Majid Haidari. These, I don't know how many I've got out.
Every
maybe not.
time the Chief Justice is praised for the way he has handled the election bonds issue, maybe, and where the praise is no doubt deserved, someone should read out that list to Chief Justice Chandrachud and say, this is a list of shame. This is a list of shame.
I have this list. The thing is that take Navlakha. UAPA, how is it a threat to the country? I want to know, can an individual ever threaten the security of this country at that age?
Yes.
I mean, why is he in house arrest? Why was he in jail? Why were the others in jail?
But aren't these
next
questions
level.
judges should be asking themselves and asking in court and asking of the government?
What can I tell you, Karan? We keep on telling the court, but there are some such provisions in the law, both in UAPA and PMLA, that if to satisfy twin conditions, the court has to come to the conclusion that he is innocent of the offence.
But look at the speed with which the Arnab Goswami case was heard when it happened during COVID, I think it was. In 24 hours, he got his bail. Why is the same level of justice and the same criteria?
Why was Chidambaram's matter not heard for several days, not even listed?
There you are.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
So I mean, not only do you have a judiciary that doesn't stand up for the media, but even when it does, it shows double standards.
But there is one development which is even worse, and that is the killing of journalists.
Oh, that's
I've been tracking this for many years. The Committee to Protect Journalists, an independent organization based in New York, has been tracking it since 1992. And in the decade when you were in power, UAPA, 10 journalists were murdered in connection with their work. But in the decade, the BJP is in power from 2014. 19 journalists have been murdered. This is not just in crossfire or dangerous assignments. Murdered in connection with their work. Every case verified, meticulously investigated and verified. But what's even worse, what they call the Global Impunity Index. The killers are not brought to justice. And year after year, CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, publishes the list of 12 or 13 countries, like Somalia, Sudan, Iraq, Mexico. India is a founding and permanent member of this club of shame, the Global Impunity Index.
Yes, there have been articles in Western papers about how journalism is a dangerous profession in India.
Yes.
Many journalists in India physically suffer, often pay with their lives.
Yes. I'll send you the list. We have the full list of journalists murdered.
In the Freedom Index now, we were at 133 in
163.
No, it was 133 in 2016.
Now we're down to 163.
Now we are down to 161.
2014.
The only two countries, so-called quote-unquote better than us, are Bangladesh and Afghanistan. Even Pakistan is higher than us.
Correct.
Can you imagine?
Correct.
Actually, it's a great misunderstanding in India, but the Pakistani media is very, very free.
No.
They have the capacity, even when General Musharraf was in power, to be critical of him in print.
Yes.
We don't understand that because we don't want to believe it.
Yes.
But you as senior journalists, you think up of something to set up something like a trust. And we will support you. I mean, the time has come for all of us have to act together.
Hats off to the top lawyers in this country, senior lawyers like you. There are a few others. I think when you take up any public issue, they spend their time and they appear pro bono. I don't know if this happens in other countries, but we are lucky in this respect, the media.
Lawyers are better defenders of our rights and our freedoms and our media than our judges are. And I'm not being critical of the judges, I'm just being factually honest.
I don't know what to say. All I can say is that, look, these are the kind of discussions that should happen on our television networks. This is the kind of information that should reach people. And the reason why I started Dil Se was precisely this. Why is this information?
On the Pegasus matter heard in the Supreme Court, we had what a wonderful list of senior counsel. You led it.
Yes, I remember.
And we got somewhere, and it's been studied.
I applaud you for having, alongside all the other ventures that you do, and you do brilliantly, added this feather to your cap.
No, that's very
because
kind
I
of
think the opportunity to bring together intelligent, candid, often outspoken people to talk about a single subject week after week after week means that you are educating the Indian people about the truth.
Yes,
and the truth is a rare commodity in our country.
I know, but let's hope for the best. And thank you. You came all the way from Chennai only for this. And thanks, Karan, for being here with us today, because I think what this conversation will tell the people of this country that we need a free press. We need a judiciary that protects the press. That's the only way democracy
And
can
you
be
need
defended.
people that respect a free press,
A free press.
and are prepared to stand up for it rather than troll it because it's critical of the Prime Minister or the Home Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kapil.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.